Okay, I'm not seeing the number increase of participants right now, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Steve Hall. I'm the Technical Services Section Chief for the Division of Air Quality. Um, the Volkswagen settlement team works in the Technical Services section under the Mobile Source Compliance branch. And today we are here to provide some information on the VW settlement program and to specifically try to answer any questions or see if there's any particular assistance that can be given for those that are in historically under-resourced counties throughout the state. We have $68 million to give out an eligible grant for eligible grant projects over the next few months, and we want to make sure that we can spread that money throughout the state and that everyone has equal opportunity to apply and be considered for this program. So we'll have a presentation of overview of the Volkswagen settlement program itself, and then a look at all the current requests for proposals that are out there and those that are upcoming. And so you can see kind of where you might fit into the program individually as a as a government entity or some other agency within one of the historically under-resourced counties. So I'd like to introduce our team today. First of all, Brian Phillips is the overall program lead for the VW settlement project. He'll be speaking here in a minute. Then we have Dave Willis, who is our zero emission vehicle infrastructure, the DC fast charging program, the team lead there. Stephen Rice is the team lead for the level 2 zero emission vehicle charging infrastructure program. Then we have Melanie Henderson, who is the team lead for the transit bus program, replacement program. We have Sheila Blanchard, who is the team lead for our school bus replacement program, and Robin Barrows, who is our outreach coordinator and was very instrumental in getting both the in-person and virtual sessions set up for this historically under-resourced county program. And then also on the line is Sean Taylor, our Public Information Officer for DAQ. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brian Phillips now for the presentation.
Thanks, Steve. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Brian Phillips. I am the program lead for the Volkswagen settlement program for the state. I'm glad to be here, and I'm excited to talk to you about Volkswagen. So what to expect today? We'll give you an overview of the Volkswagen settlement, a summary of our phase 1 awarded projects, do an overview of our phase 2 program, and then we'll get into how and when to submit your applications. In addition, we'll talk about information on the release request for proposals. We have several RFPs currently out that are live. We have a few more that will come live in the next coming months. Then we'll have talk about our scoring criteria and eligibility tool that we developed for applicants to use to verify if their project is eligible for funding. And then we'll tell you where to find information after this workshop. And then we'll list our program contacts and have a question and answer session. So why are we here? Volkswagen of America was found to be violating the Clean Air Act. Basically, they installed software defeat devices on their light-duty diesel vehicles. Essentially, these software caused the emission control devices to turn on when the vehicles were being tested, but they turned off when the vehicles actually be driven on the road. So essentially, these vehicles were emitting 40% more emissions than they were actually designed to do. So we're talking about 580,000 vehicles impacted nationally. Of those, 18,000 were registered in North Carolina. From that, North Carolina received $92 million to reduce nitrogen oxide emissions through replacement of heavy-duty diesel equipment and also installing level 2 and DC fast electric vehicle charging station infrastructure across the state. We have completed our phase 1 award process. Projects are coming to completion, and we have begun rolling out our phase 2 RFPs as of the 1st of February. Additionally, in phase 2, we have identified 37 historically under-resourced counties that could benefit from this funding opportunity. And this program is here to provide guidance and assistance on how to complete competitive applications and submit those for funding. So in phase 1, we awarded $26.4 million overall. Our largest pot of allocated money was for our school bus program. We have awarded 111 school buses in phase 1. Of that, 6 were all-electric vehicles. The first all-electric vehicle was put in operation last month by the Eastern Band of Cherokee. Additionally, we funded 16 transit buses, of which 11 were all-electric. We funded 45 on-road vehicles. In addition, we also funded 27 DC fast charging infrastructure sites across the state and 78 level 2 charging infrastructure sites across the state. So in total, we funded 72 vehicles and 109 charging stations. We do have some completed phase 1 projects. We are writing stories on those projects as they're completed and posting those stories on our website. The one story about the Eastern Band of Cherokee, there's a blog on our website from Director Mike Abrazinskas. I do encourage anyone that's interested in electric school buses to go to our website and read that blog. It's very good. It has some good pictures of staff actually on the vehicle, and part of the ceremony where Governor Cooper and EPA Administrator Michael Regan actually spoke at the ceremony. So phase 2. Phase 2, we're doing a slightly different process as in phase 1. In phase 1, we combined our school bus, transit bus, and clean heavy-duty programs into one program. And in phase 2, we're splitting those up. So we have separate RFPs for each of our programs under the diesel bus and vehicle replacement program. As you see, the largest portion of funding in phase 2 is going to our school bus program as 40% of the allocated money in phase 2. And 20% goes to transit buses and clean heavy-duty equipment and vehicle program. In our DC fast program, we also changed this in phase 2. We split the money up between our priority corridor projects and existing site upgrades. In our level 2 program, we added a new program for state government agencies in the amount of $1 million. And we split our public access from our workplace and multi-unit dwelling RFPs. So those programs will all be open at separate times. And additionally, we're still committing to spend only 5% of the costs for admin costs to run the program. Overall, we have $67.9 million available. Initially, we had planned to do 3 phases of funding for VW. After phase 1, we decided to combine phases 2 and 3 into one final phase with $67.9 million available. If you haven't subscribed to our VW email list, I do encourage you to do so. This is where we send out information about the program, notifications when RFPs are released, and just give you updates on where we are in the administration of the program. So I do encourage you to send us an email with the word subscribe in the subject line to daq.nc_VW-grants@ncdeaner.gov. So what types of projects can be funded with these funds? We can replace school buses, and that includes activity buses, transit and shuttle buses, heavy-duty on and off-road equipment, so that includes refuse trucks, dump trucks. In addition, we also are funding electric vehicle charging infrastructure, so that includes DC fast and level 2 charging infrastructure across the state. And other projects that are also eligible include our Diesel Emission Reduction Act program, which includes projects that are not typically eligible in the VW, but can be funded under our DERE program. That includes construction equipment and agriculture equipment. And lastly, other projects that are eligible in the VW funding include freight switchers, tugboats and ferries, ocean-going shore power, airport cargo handling equipment, and port and ferry forklifts. For forklifts, it must be at least 8,000 pounds of lift capacity to be eligible. So in our timeline, we have already started with our Group 1 RFPs, which includes the Transit Bus Program, which was released on February 1st, our DC Fast Infrastructure Program, which was released on February 14th, our Level 2 State Agency Program was released on February 28th. All three programs are open for 90 days. Transit Bus Program will be the first to close fairly soon. I believe it's May 6th that RFP closes. In our Group 2, our School Bus Program was released on March 7th. And then our Level 2 Public Assessment Program was March 21st. The Level 2 Public Assessment Program is a first come, first served program. That application opens up on May 2nd. And Stephen will talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation. In our Group 3, we just released our existing sites capacity program for DC FAS on Monday. Then our Level 2 multi-unit dwelling program will open later in May. Our clean heavy duty equipment and vehicle replacement program will open in May as well. And then finally, our Level 2 workplace for non-state government projects opens in June of 2022. So who's eligible? Projects can be submitted by local, state, and tribal governments and organizations. Projects can be submitted by public and private nonprofit organizations, and projects can be submitted by a public-private partnership where the lead applicant represents a public sector or a public-private nonprofit entity. Additionally, for our ZEV infrastructure programs, both public and private applicants are eligible to apply. So, how do you apply for funding? We have here 8 steps to apply for funding. Our first step is to get an NCID. If you do not already have one, you need to register for NCID, and that confirmation can take up to 2 weeks. You do not want to wait to the last minute to request an NCID or access to the grant management system. Next, request access to our grant management system. So you go online, there's an application online to request access, and then you also will email a NC substitute W-9 form to SVC NC VW application at ncdnr.gov. And here's the link for our online access form. This link can also be found on the RFPs and also on our website. Next, you gather all your information for your application. This includes the information on the original vehicle, information on your new vehicle you plan to purchase, vendor quotes, letters of support, etc. We do have checklists on the website that can help you guide you through this process. Next, you will register for GMS and program RFP webinars. Typically, after the request for proposal is released, we have 2 webinars. One is for our grant management system the week after the RFP is released, and then 2 weeks after the RFP release, we will have a program-specific webinar about a program manager, where you can ask questions about the program and applicability of your projects. Next, you apply in GMS. So you go to this link. It's a portal for our grant management system. Our RFPs have been opening on a rolling basis. And so right now, it'll only show you the RFPs that we're currently accepting applications for in the grant management system once you have access. You will complete and submit your application. Like I said, each RFP is open for 90 days, with the exception of our Level 2 public access, multi-unit dwelling, and workplace program applications. Those will be first come, first serve until our funds are exhausted. Next, you can also check on your application process. You can log into the grant management system and click on View Applications to see where your application is. As you submit your application, it may not have any activity for about 2 months, and that only means that staff are very busy evaluating your applications, doing emission reduction calculations, setting up our selection committees to select applications. So you may not see anything activity for a while. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. You can contact me, or you can contact one of the program managers if you have questions about your application or the process in general. Again, if you have not subscribed to our email list, I do encourage you to do so. You'll see this slide one more time, I believe, in this presentation, maybe 2. And next, I'll pass it off to Melanie Henderson to discuss the Transit and Shuttle Bus program.
Thank you, Brian. Before I start, I just want to remind everybody, if you do have questions, we will have plenty of time after the presentation to answer questions, but do type your questions into the Q&A box. Make sure it's addressed to all of our panelists and not just a specific person, so we can make sure to get your questions answered. As Brian said, my name is Melanie Henderson. I am the Transit and Shuttle Bus Program Manager. We were the first RFP to get released back on February 1st. The Transit and Shuttle Bus program covers class 4 through 8 transit and shuttle buses that include the bus style, shuttle style, as well as the school bus style bus, as long as they are not carrying students to and from school or school related activities. So if you have a community center that has a school bus style bus, it would be eligible under the Transit and Shuttle Bus program. Next slide. All of our diesel vehicle programs are replacement programs, which means you have to have an old diesel engine bus or diesel vehicle that you are wanting to replace with a newer, cleaner model. For the Transit and Shuttle Bus program, the engine model year must be 2009 or older. We have no flexibility with that date. It has to be a 2009 diesel engine in that older bus that you're wanting to replace. This program, as I mentioned before, covers the class 4 through 8 transit and shuttle buses. You can replace these old vehicles with any new diesel, alternative fuel, or all-electric buses. The new bus should be the same model year or a year prior of the award. So we are going to be making awards later this summer. So you would look at a 2022 or 2021 bus model year for your new bus. Also, with all of our diesel vehicle programs, that old bus must be scrapped. If you'll go to the next slide. So what do I mean by scrapped? We don't want these buses or engines to ever be used again. When we talk about scrap, we require you to put a 3-inch hole into the engine block for all engines, and then to cut the frame rails of the chassis completely in half. As I said, we don't want you to use the vehicle or the engine ever again. What you do with that scrap vehicle is up to you, but we don't want them used ever again. Next slide. For the Transit and Shuttle Bus program, if you are a government entity, the new replacement bus is eligible for up to 100% of the funding. This includes new diesel, alternative fuel, or all-electric buses. If you are applying for an all-electric bus, for every bus you apply for that's all-electric, you are also allowed to apply for up to $75,000 towards the infrastructure associated with that bus. For non-government entities, you are eligible to apply for up to 25% of the funding for new replacement diesel and alternative fueled vehicles, and up to 75% of the funding for replacement all-electric buses. Next slide. The RFP for the Transit and Shuttle Bus program came out on February 1st. We are the first RFP to open. We're also the first one to close. Our deadline will be May 2nd. It will close at 11:59 p.m. We have no ability to extend this deadline. If you do not apply prior to when our application close, you're out of luck. So you do need to apply, and we encourage you to apply as early as possible. Right now we're looking at less than 3 weeks left. So for those with transit and shuttle buses, you want to go ahead and start getting your application in. We'll take a couple of months to review the information and hopefully have our awards announced later this summer in July. And I think with the next slide, I'll be turning this over to Dave Willis, who is the DC Fast Program Manager.
Thanks, Melanie. So yeah, the DC Fast program is for DC Fast sites. And what is a DC Fast site? It is a electric vehicle charging infrastructure that is 50 kilowatts or greater. Anything less than 50 kilowatts is a level 2 site. Now, what's the usage for a DC fast site versus a level 2? A DC fast site is more of your gas station type feel. You're going to be there for an hour or less. You're going to park, you're going to go to the bathroom, you're going to use it like a gas station. You're going to get something to eat, charge for 30 minutes, and then move on down the road. These are best situated off the major highway corridors across the state and in the my first RFP, that's the Priority Corridor Program. The second one that's just come out is the existing sites. We'll talk about that in a second. For level 2, it's the most appropriate to have level 2 at places where vehicles are going to park for longer than an hour. Shopping malls, movie theaters, points of interest like state parks or community colleges, things where the vehicle is going to park for longer than an hour. These are a couple of the pictures of infrastructure that were installed in phase 1. These do require a big commitment on just the size and space, a little bit more infrastructure needed electrically. You can see that in the first picture. Next slide. So for the 2 RFPs that I have out, the priority corridors, there's just under $5 million that's for that. That is, it's opened on the 14th. That will, February 14th, it will close to applications on May 16th. It is, both of mine are competitive. For the priority corridors, the awards will be made in July or August. For the existing sites, we've got just over $2 million. That has just opened on Monday of this week. Again, it's competitive. And the applications for that close July 11th. And the rewards then will be made in October or November. And those are tentative dates, but they're pretty close to what we expect. So that's just over $7 million that we're going to roll out before the end of the year and award those. That's a lot of funds going into electric vehicle infrastructure. Next slide. Okay, so for the priority corridors, what is a priority corridor? A priority corridor are these selected segments of highways. It's not the whole highway. In the RFP, there is a table that gives the starting and end points of these segments. That's a lot more, that's easier to understand than the map because the map's a little bit deceptive. Going from the eastern part of the state to the west, you obviously see 95, you see some of 74, 40, a little bit of 70 down towards the coast. You see 264, 64, and 158, pieces of 85, pieces of 73 and 74 going down out of the triad area, 40 heading west out of the state. This actually goes all the way from Murphy to Manio. That's one of our intentions, is that we facilitate travel across the state. Now, by no means is this everywhere we need DC fast charging. There are tons of places across the state that we need DC fast charging, but the majority of those are going to be on the priority corridors. Next slide. Okay, so for the DC fast, the priority corridors, I gave you those dates. The existing sites, which is technically for the expansion or replacement of existing DC fast sites. That's why we're calling the existing sites. So if you already have a DC fast site somewhere and you like to add a charger to it, that would be eligible. That is not the priority corridor scoring bonuses are not included in this RFP. Next slide. Okay, so for the priority corridor, if your project is not located on the priority corridor, what should you do? You should apply. Brian, if you go ahead and hit that next slide. It is important that you apply. My expectation, and this is just a guess, but about 50% of our projects will be awarded that are on the priority corridor, and 50% of the projects will be off the priority corridors. So if you think you have a great project and it's not in one of the priority corridor segments, please definitely apply. And for those that the expansion and replacement, apply. I mean, we need tons of infrastructure across the state. So next slide. So the funding breakdown is pretty simple. I'm not going to read all of this. This is for the priority corridor funding levels. As it increases in kilowatts, it increases in the per port cost that we can cover. We can only cover for government owned, we can cover 100%. For non-government, we can cover 80%. And then it goes from priority corridor to non-priority corridor. So if you're 5 miles off, you would get less funding in the priority corridor RFP. Next slide. Okay, in the existing, it's set up a lot very similar. The higher the kilowatts, the greater your funding level. 100% for government, 80% for non-government, and it still has and this is a per port, and you can go up to 4 ports for the 50 to 75 kilowatt chargers, and over 75 kilowatts, you can only do 2. Next slide. And I'm going to hand this off to Stephen, and he's going to talk about the level 2 infrastructure program.
All right, thank you, Dave, and good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're doing well and ready to learn about the level 2 infrastructure program. Let me start by saying I typically don't sound like this. It's the lethal combination of tree pollen and cheering loud for the hurricanes. If at any point I don't communicate the information clear enough, please write in the Q&A, say what on earth did Steve say on slide whatever, and I'll be more than happy to go back and try to cover it better the second time around. But going into the level 2 aspect of today, most of these slides will focus on the 2 sub-programs that are currently active, but right now we'll start with some general level 2 information that applies to everyone interested in level 2 charging projects. Next slide, Brian. So here's a table with some basic information on all of the phase 2 level 2 programs. Looking at that first row for the state agency program, the biggest takeaways are that this is a competitive application program and that the application is currently open in the grants management system but closes on May 31st. Beneath that row is information on the public access program. And notice that it's a first come, first serve award type, so different than the state agency program, and that the application will be available within the GMS on May 2nd. These are the 2 subprograms that have their RFPs released, and while the multi-unit dwelling and the workplace programs are planning their releases in May and June respectively. Both the state agency and public access programs have just over $1 million reserved for each for funding projects, so please do not wait to gain access to the GMS or to apply. Next slide, please. Like all Volkswagen programs, there are a number of project and site requirements that should be considered before you apply for funding in any level 2 program category. For example, each project must have a minimum of 2 ports, and chargers must be maintained and operated for a minimum of 5 years from the date of project completion. A full list of project requirements for each program is found in each program's RFP. Next slide. So now I'll focus on the active level 2 programs, starting with state agencies. The first question you might have is who is eligible to apply for state agency program funding. In short, this program is designed for and limited to North Carolina state government agencies and state maintained attractions. Government is defined in the RFP as a North Carolina state government agency, institution, or attraction supported by state funds. Please note that state agencies are subject to using contractors approved on the Department of Administration's statewide term contract 69-1A for electric vehicle charging station infrastructure. Next slide. The state agency's RFP identifies 4 locations that are eligible for Level 2 ZEV charging infrastructure funding. These are government-owned property, government-leased property, state parks, and state museums and other state-maintained attractions. If the government property is leased, it must have at least 5 years remaining on that lease from the date of project contract execution, and the property site owner must provide approval for the project. Next slide, please. The type of access and charger used in a project will determine the maximum percentage of total project cost reimbursed. If a project offers public access and network chargers, it can be reimbursed up to 100%. If a project offers public access but uses non-network chargers, it can be reimbursed up to 80%. And if a project is not publicly accessible and uses non-network chargers, it can be reimbursed up to 60%. Multiple project types cannot be incorporated into a single application, and public access chargers must be accessible during site or attraction business hours to the general public without any type of restriction. If you're applying for a public access project, you must attest to that requirement in the project details of your application or provide some kind of proof of this accessibility. Next slide, please. All right, let's shift gears really quick and talk about the Level 2 Public Access Program. In Phase 1, publicly accessible projects were eligible for funding, but did not have their own designated program. Out of the 79 agreements for Level 2 projects that were awarded in Phase 1, 70 had the designation of publicly accessible. After seeing the desire that applicants had to provide this type of charging, we decided to make it a point of emphasis in Phase 2. Next slide. In the public access program, applicants are limited to $25,000 in approved rebate vouchers at any given time, and all chargers must be networked. Something that's new in Phase 2 is that the rebate vouchers for awarded projects will expire after 1 year from the date of an agreement being fully executed. The pandemic and supply chain issues that we saw in Phase 1 really impacted and weighed hard on the original 180-day timeline, kind of made it borderline impossible for most awardees to complete the project in 180 days. So we decided to learn from that experience and double the time for Phase 2. Next slide, please. So who is eligible to apply for public access program funding? The general list from the RFP is found on this slide, and as long as you are not applying on behalf of yourself or considered a North Carolina state agency or providing charging for workplace or multi-unit dwelling purposes, you should be eligible to apply. Just a reminder that from the basic information table earlier, that state agencies, workplaces, and MUD programs each have their own RFP and funding amounts separate from this public access program. Specific details on eligibility and requirements for applicants are found in the Level 2 Public Access RFP. Next slide, please. So this type of or the type of property that a project is on will determine the maximum percentage of total project cost reimbursed. If a project is on government-owned property and offers public access, it can be reimbursed at $5,000 per port or up to 100%, whichever of these two options are less. Or if a project is on non-government-owned property and offers public access, it can be reimbursed at $4,000 per port or up to 80%, again, whichever funding option is less. So in an example, let's say that a project was to be done on non-government owned property and consist of installing 4 level 2 charging ports. If all the quotes for this project totaled $22,000, then the 2 calculated rebate options would be $16,000 or $17,600. Since the program uses the lesser of the 2 calculations, the maximum rebate offered would be the $16,000 for the project. Please be aware that multiple project types cannot be incorporated into a single application. This is just like the state agencies program and all of the level 2 programs. And that in phase 2, all chargers, regardless of project type, must be available to the public for an annual average of 12 hours per day without restriction. Again, just like I suggested in the state agency's application, you'll need to attach proof of this in your application or attest to this in the application. The site requirements for the public to access rebate program, these are found in the RFP, and all of the requirements from phase 1 have carried over to phase 2. There are a few requirements that are new to phase 2. I did mention a few times that the sites must be available to the public for that annual average of 12 hours per day. And here we have, again, in like the state agency's program, that if the property is not owned by the applicant must provide a signed letter of approval from the landowner, and that projects must include at least one designated and clearly marked EV parking space per port. Again, all the entire list and additional requirements and information are found in this program's RFP. I believe our next slide will go into the school bus program, so I will turn the presentation over to Sheila.
Sheila, I believe you're muted.
Brian, it doesn't indicate, it says that her mic is on, but maybe she's just having some microphone problems.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, of course I have technical difficulties. Okay, my name's Sheila. I am your school bus program manager. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the school bus program, what is eligible. You can see some of the vehicles that are eligible here, some of the new ones. We are replacing activity buses, so in case you're wondering, we've gotten that question quite a bit. Next slide, please. Okay, so just like the rest of our vehicle programs, there are a lot of specifications about what can be replaced. School buses are very specifically defined. They are buses that transport students to and from school and school-related activities. So this does include activity buses and then the daily school buses. Eligible buses include 2009 engine model year and older. The 2009 is consistent throughout all the vehicle programs, and there's a reason for that, which I'll talk to a little bit when we talk about choosing a competitive vehicle. They must be replaced with the new diesel or alternative fueled or all electric bus, and then replaced buses must be scrapped, as Melanie mentioned earlier. You have to drill a hole in the engine, and then you have to cut the chassis and all that. Next slide, please. Similarly, in the school bus levels, there's $27.1 million available for phase 2 for school buses, which is a lot of money to replace North Carolina school buses. We are prioritizing electrification projects. 50% of these funds will be prioritized for electric school buses. This includes the cost. When you do an application, this can include the cost for the associated infrastructure for that bus. So it's a one-to-one. So one charging station for one bus. Similarly, for government, you are eligible for 100% reimbursement. And then for non-government, similarly to the transit program, you're eligible for 25% with diesel, 25% for an alternative fuel, and 75% for an all-electric project. Next slide, please. Okay, so our timeline, we released the RFP on March 7th of this year. The application is open now. Once again, I will say, if you have not gotten your NCID, or if you have not been asked for access to the GMS, the clock is ticking. It does take some time for that to happen. The due dates for school buses is June 6th. We will be doing the evaluations between June and July. We'll do some selections. We'll send it to a selection committee, all of our vehicles that are ranked and scored to our selection committee. And then we hope to award grant or announce awards in July and August of this year. Next slide, please. So we have missed both of these, but they are both online. We have a grant system, management system, new users webinar that is online. And then we also have the school bus RFP information session recording, which is online. And you can find all that under the phase 2 VW settlement in the links at the end of this, this presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how to submit an eligible and competitive application. These are two very different things. Eligible, there are specifics for the consent decree on what we can replace, who we can replace it for, et cetera, et cetera. And a competitive application is going to be based on the amount of applications that we receive, the amount of vehicles that we receive, the amount of charging stations we receive, and how you are ranked against other applicants. Next slide, please. Eligibility. Basically, for all programs, there are different levels of eligibility. So you're going to want to review your RFP closely to make sure your organization is eligible to apply for funding, and then what that funding level will be and how much you should apply for. So as far as the vehicle replacement program, there are also different requirements for the model years. Like I said, it's 2009 and older. Some have mileage requirements, and then there are cost shares for some replacement equipment. And it's important to know, no individuals applying on their own behalf are eligible for funding under any VW program. Next slide, please. I actually developed a form that we're calling the VW Eligibility Tool, which will help direct you to the right RFP or the right application to apply under. And essentially, you get your information for your vehicle, you get your information for your level 2 charging station, and it will talk you through a series of questions that you answer, and will tell you whether or not whether your project is eligible and under what RFP it would be eligible under. I recommend that if you haven't visited yet to visit that, and just to get an idea about what kinds of things are eligible. Next slide, please. As I said, what's going to happen is we're going to get all of the vehicles, and this is specifically for vehicles, and we're going to rank those vehicles and score those vehicles. And then we're going to send those to the selection committee, and then they will choose which vehicles to fund. We are largely doing this outreach program in order to increase the pool of applicants that we get in order to have the most competitive and the best projects that we can get in order to really mitigate the NOx that was created by those by those Volkswagens. So what we are really committed to is making sure that that the cost effectiveness and the NOx emissions reductions really count. And as you can see from the scoring criteria, the cost effectiveness and NOx emissions reductions are a large part of the score. This is essentially based on the vehicle that you replace and then the vehicle that you replace it with. Additionally, there's a 10-point bonus for electrification. And then additionally, there's 10 points bonus for being in a historically under-resourced county. And that will be where the duty cycle of the vehicle takes place, would be the county that you would want to put in your application. It's important to know that although electric projects are prioritized, essentially they will be competing against one another, but we are going to replace a lot of vehicles with a lot of different technologies. All fuels are eligible to apply, so I urge you to apply. And one thing I did not say about school buses is that for school buses in particular, if you're applying for an activity bus, you will do an application, your own application, and DPI, the Department of Public Instruction, is also doing an application that to replace the day-to-day buses. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to contact me, and we can clarify any questions you have about that. Next slide, please. This is actually the scoring criteria that's in the RFP. It specifically tells you how we're getting these numbers. The NOx mitigated, the NOx reduced. We're getting that from the diesel emissions quantifier, which is a tool that's on the EPA website. It allows you to calculate how much emissions are mitigated by particular projects. I urge you, if you have questions about which of your vehicles are better, you can go and use that tool and put the data in for your vehicles and figure out which of your vehicles are probably going to score higher. The one thing about the cost effectiveness is that is based on the amount of NOx VW funded per NOx reduced. So this means that if you do a voluntary cost share, you will increase your competitiveness of your application. Next slide, please. This is actually the spreadsheet, a copy of the spreadsheet that you must submit for any of your vehicle projects. This is across the board: transit, on-road, school bus, et cetera, et cetera. So this is, you're going to take all of the information about the vehicle that you will be replaced, which is on the left of your screen. It's going to ask you, to give us the specifics of the engine make and the engine model. And then you're going to fill out the right side of the screen with what you would like to replace it with. Now, the things that count most are highlighted in this orange when it comes to getting that cost effectiveness and NOx score. So things like model year, the amount of fuel used, and the vehicle mileage, as well as the remaining life, are the things that really can affect that score. Next slide, please. Model year. So the model year, like I said, that 2009 is not arbitrary. 2009 and older tend to be, they tend to put out more emissions, and that determines the tier level of the engine. And by tier level, I mean how much emissions controls are put on the tier. So a tier 4 has more emissions control on it than a tier 2. Typically, anything before a 2009 is going to be a tier 2. We're really targeting some of these older engines. So the older the engine, the lower the tier it's going to be, and the more emissions that engine will produce. So if you can see here on the left side, there is just one thing to note. Most of you that are fleet managers probably know this, but on the left side, we have the vehicle tag. And if you notice, it says that it's a 97, but then on the right side from the vehicle tag, that's the engine year, which is what we're most interested in. That's a 96. It is fairly common for engines to be in different years of vehicles. So when you fill out your spreadsheets, make sure that you pay attention to that. The difference between a 96 and a 97 as far as emissions is substantial. So just make sure you're taking a look at that. Next slide, please. Annual mileage. We all know that the more miles you put on a car in a year, the more exhaust, the more emissions. This is directly related to fuel use. This is directly related to how much you're combusting. So what you can do, we want that annual mileage. We want you to be as specific and as accurate as you can. If you do not have a real reliable way to get the annual mileage, you can take the odometer reading and divide it by the vehicle age. And obviously, to be competitive, the more annual miles a vehicle gets, the more emissions. So that will be a more competitive project. Next slide, please. Remaining life. Remaining life is the expected life expectancy of the vehicle in years. Because we're using lifetime emissions, what we are going to do is take those annual emissions and multiply it by the life expectancy. So if you have 4 or 5 years left in a vehicle that is on the road, then the annual emissions times that 4 years will be the lifetime emissions that you can expect from replacement of that vehicle. This is largely up to you as a fleet manager. You can take the expected lifetime of a vehicle and divide by annual miles and get a year estimate. So if you have any questions about that, please let us know. We will flag out of range values. So there's not 100 years probably on your buses or on your vehicles. So just try and be as accurate as you can in this input as well. Next slide, please. This is just a little infographic that I worked up just to kind of show visually how a 2006 and a 1996 vehicles, how these different factors affect the competitiveness of those vehicles for replacement. The 2006 is a tier 2, the 1996 is a tier 1. As you can see, they have different emissions footprints. That 1996 is putting out a lot of emissions. And then, you know, the mileage obviously adds to those emissions footprints. And then over a lifetime, whatever your lifetime expectancy is, you get the total lifetime emissions. And as you can see, even a 1996 that only gets 6,000 miles, if it's fairly well maintained and it has 10 years on it, it can have a fairly large emissions footprint. And a 2006, even though it's newer, it gets, if it's the workhorse of your fleet and it has a lot of remaining life, you can have a lot of emissions from that. So if you find that you're submitting a vehicle because you want to replace it and it doesn't have some of these criteria, the best way to make that competitive is to add a voluntary cost share to that. So just a little bit of money, a little 10% skin in the game will make your vehicle more competitive against all the others. Finally, we haven't released the on-road or non-road, but essentially for non-road, it's the same, except for we take annual hours. And then we look at things like horsepower and fuel use to get those same numbers. Once again, there's a link down there to the diesel emissions quantifier that can help you determine your emissions benefits for each of the vehicles that you may submit. Next slide, please. DC Fast. There's really only one thing that's going to help your project be competitive if you already have a site in mind. Most people have a DC Fast site that they have, you know, they want to put it somewhere. So a lot of the other things are not going to change. But that cost effectiveness, the way you can get that score to be higher is to increase your cost share. In phase 1, the mean cost share of awarded projects was about 25%. So that's something to keep in mind for your next, for your applications. Next slide, please. This is this very specific scoring criteria. Take a look at that when you're determining your projects, just to give you an idea of how we, the team, will be scoring your project and then sending it, getting points together and sending it to selection committee. Next slide, please. Just some things to consider. Your project should be eligible. Please visit the eligibility tool if you have any questions. There is no way that we can fund anything younger than a 2009. That is a legal consent decree, so it must be 2009 and older. Voluntary cost shares in all of the competitive RFPs will make your project more competitive. I would start the process early. That way, if you have any questions, you can talk to us, and maybe we can give you some guidance about which of your fleet vehicles could be more competitive, or give you an idea about how to make your application more competitive. I would read the RFP carefully, fill out all the fields in the application. We do have some short answers. If we get projects that are similar, we will go to the short answers in order to make some decisions if we have to. So don't leave those blank. Those are important ways that you tell us why your project matters and why we should fund you. We will not consider incomplete applications. If you do not upload the spreadsheet, if you do not fill out all the fields, that will not be considered a complete application. And once the application closes, you will not be able to submit it. So just keep that in mind. And remember, electric projects are prioritized in phase 2, but all fuels are considered. And once again, we're here to help. Please don't hesitate to contact us, to email us. And our contacts are on the next slide, I believe. These are our general VW contacts. We're all here today. We got Brian and Sean and Robin. And then these are the various program contacts. And once again, this presentation is online, and you can download it. And then once you go into screen mode or presentation mode, you can access all the links here and the emails and things like that. The final slides are a lot of the useful links. So really everything that we've talked about, the eligibility tool, our outreach website, all of the RFPs, all of the NCID registration, how to get on the GMS, how to use the GMS, all of this, we've tried to link everything in this useful links, as well as the next page. So there's a lot of them. This is a really good resource once you download it and get it, to just quickly get to all of the things that we've talked about. And I think that is probably the end. Oh, you can also Google and find our website, NCVW Settlement. I do it all the time. And then one final time, if you're not on our mailing list and you would like to receive information and updates about everything that's going on, please send the word subscribe to this email and we will add you to it and you will get all the information. Next slide, please. Additionally, we have some upcoming in-person meetings. If you want to shake hands or talk to us or bring your fleet information and talk to us, we'd be glad to talk to you. Just some of the dates here. You will have to register for those meetings, and those registrations are on our website underneath this particular page. Next slide. Or is that the end? Okay. Finally, so please type your questions into the chat box, and we will do our best to answer them.
Thanks, Sheila. I'll start reading the questions that have come in now. I just want to reiterate, folks, that we have scheduled another hour for this Q&A. So please type in your questions into the Q&A box. Ask specific questions about your application or your project, and we are happy to provide the information that we have. So the first question here comes from Kayla, who asks, I am reviewing the documents available online for the transit and shuttle bus program. The sample application and checklist mention diesel bus and vehicle program questions and checklist. Is this information applicable to the transit and shuttle bus program? I am specifically referring to the required application attachments and sample transit bus application. So Melanie, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I can take care of that. Hi, Kayla. Our example application and spreadsheet were based on information we received in phase 1. And in phase 1, the transit and shuttle bus was included under the entire program of diesel bus and vehicles. So yes, this does apply to the transit and shuttle bus program. You'll see similar stuff for our school bus program and the clean heavy duty vehicle programs. But yes, it does apply to the transit and shuttle bus program.
And that's the only question we have received so far. So we can wait for a minute. Actually, Kayla has a follow-up. So when we are preparing our applications, these are the examples we should look at, and this is the information we should prepare.
When you are preparing, and I can only speak specifically about the transit and shuttle bus program, when you look at the example application online, that's going to mirror the information that is in the grant management system. So you'll put in the information about your entity, who the contacts are, the cost information, plus the same 6 questions will be all on there. In addition to the application, Required documents are going to be the spreadsheet, which there is an example of the spreadsheet online for the transit and shuttle bus program, which includes information from the old vehicle you are replacing as well as the new vehicle you will be purchasing. In addition, required documents also should include quotes for the new vehicle as well as any infrastructure cost information that you have received if it's going to be an all-electric bus.
Kayla says, thank you for that clarification, Melanie. Perfect. That's all I needed to know. Thank you very much.
I look forward to her application.
And Sean, as we're waiting for maybe some more questions to come through, we did have an attendee with a hand raised for a good portion of today. Oh, and it looks like they might have left the meeting. Tom Middleton. If he's no longer with us, I guess we'll follow up to see what his question might have been.
Okay. Any other questions? Just please type your question into the Q&A chat box.
I will say there was a question I received via phone during this presentation. It was from one of my Phase 1 awardees. They asked if they were going to apply for Phase 2. Could they still use the same information, login information for the grant management system that they use for Phase 1? And the answer is yes. So if you did receive an award during Phase 1 and already have access to the grant management system, you will not need to get that again for Phase 2 for applying.
And for any attendees that do not have access to our grant management system, we do encourage you to do that sooner than later. That process can take up to a week or longer, depending on if there's problems with your NCID or just getting a state substitute W-9 for you to complete the process. So we do encourage you to do those requests as soon as possible.
And Brian, also the same thing when they are applying for the programs with deadlines, do put in your applications as soon as possible.
Correct.
Still waiting. We'll keep the Q&A open for a little bit longer, just in case anyone has anything that they want to ask or are typing something in. Anything you want to add, Brian?
I want to stress what everybody else says. We're here to help you. So if you do have questions, please ask it. If not today, definitely reach out to one of the program managers for program specific questions about our project. We do want to get this money out. We want to see this money go as far across state as possible. So if you have a project, definitely submit an application for the appropriate program.
Brian, I have a question.
Yes.
What if an entity applied in Phase 1 and they didn't receive funding and they want to reapply in Phase 2? Are there strategies that they can use or folks they can talk to be able to apply?
Yes, we do have a list of additional resources outside of the DEQ staff that you can contact. That includes our Clean Cities Coalition members, the North Carolina Clean Technology Center. They can probably do more than we can. Like if you don't know who a vendor to go to for your project, they can help you find a vendor for your project. They can also go over your application from your previous application and give you pointers on how to help your application, a future application be more competitive. And if you need a copy of your phase 1 application, reach out to the program manager. We can provide a copy of that in PDF form to you. You can also reach out to the program manager as well, just kind of say, what can I do to help make my project better in phase 2?
Super, thanks.
And I put a map up of historically under-resourced counties. This is a map of the 37 counties that are eligible for that 10 additional bonus points. It's a little bit hard to read. I can make it a little bit smaller. Let's see. That doesn't happen often. You can find another map. You can find the same map on our website. It'd be a lot easier to see on our website than as opposed to this picture right here. And we do have, again, if you do not have access to our grant management system, we do have a webinar coming up on Monday. You go to the website for the DC FAS existing sites program, and you can register for that webinar. Even though that's under that program, that's applicable to all programs. So if you do not have access, I do encourage you to participate in that webinar. There's a lot of information, and it could help make the process of getting access to the system a lot faster. And we also have recordings of the previous versions of that webinar as well. All right, I'll do one last call for questions, and if not, we'll give you some more time back this afternoon. A copy of this recording will be made available on our Historical Under-Resourced County website, along with a PDF copy of our presentation. We do appreciate everybody attending us today, and look forward to your applications in phase 2.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.